welcome to a bonus episode of the Couple Money Podcast. I had such a great time talking with Sarah from High Fiving Dollars. Besides sharing her experiences working abroad, she had some great and real stories about the psychology of money and becoming more comfortable with talking about it as a couple. Since it didn't have too much to do with our original focus of working abroad, I split the interview. So here it is. I hope you enjoy. After coming back to Canada years ago, Sarah found herself in a spot she never expected.
Okay, when I first came back to Canada, I made the decision to move back because I was like, I wanted to start a life with this person, or at the time that's what I wanted, and I was like, I'm going to be back and I'm going to find a job and we're going to get a house, blah blah blah. So I think literally 2 weeks after I flew back to Canada, he was like, yeah, we're ending this, and so I was like, what? And then I saw my credit card statement literally the next day. It was weird. It was like I was in my bedroom and it looked exactly like it was in high school. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm $9,000 in debt. I have no job. My boyfriend literally broke up with me. And I just was like, this is ridiculous.
Upset and frustrated, she called a friend who reminded her of what she could do.
He's always been a voice of reason. And he's like, Sarah, you're stronger than this. You can do this. And I said, you're right. And I started thinking of all the things that I've gone through before that.
Encouraged, Sarah was determined to get out of debt. Besides fixing her finances, she also wanted to change and understand her relationship with money.
Literally, I looked on my bookshelf and there was a Dalai Lama book and I was like, oh, I haven't read that. And so I started just reading it, and there was a quote, and there's a quote about what did you do to kind of contribute to your own happiness or that situation? And I thought, what, I contributed a lot to that. It was just as much my fault what happened in the relationship as it was his. And so, I don't know. I think it was afternoon when I saw the credit card statement. It was about nighttime when I was like, okay, I have to figure out a way to get out of it. And so the next day I called a restaurant I used to work for, and I said, do you have work for me? And the manager's like, yes. And so I started working at the restaurant, and then it kind of grew organically from there.
The good news is that Sarah did get out of debt. Through her own experience and talking with others, she saw how easy it was to attach emotions to money.
Just from observations and talking to people, they're so intimidated by talking about money. And at the end of the day, it's like, if you want to look at money in the tangible sense, it's literally a piece of paper, it's numbers, there's nothing really. It's kind of a neutral thing, right? But we attach all this stuff to it. We attach our emotions, we attach our self-worth to money. And to me, it didn't really kind of hit me that that's what it was until I'd say a few years ago. And it's really interesting, even just talking to people money. I'm a really curious person. I ask a lot of questions, and people are really afraid to talk about simple stuff oh, how much did you spend on that car? It's like, well, why are we so afraid to talk about it? What is it? It comes down to, I think, basically how we feel about ourselves. For me, when I wrote about that breakup on my blog, it was a light bulb moment. Wow, I was spending all this money because I wanted to feel loved, whatever that was for me at the time. I wanted to feel valued and worthy. This person that I was with, I wanted him to love me. So I'd equated money with that. And, it didn't take until I broke up with him, I realized it, but I didn't really internalize it until I'd say 6 years ago, which was a couple years after the breakup, that I was like, wow, I gotta really think about this. Am I still spending money because I want somebody to love me, or is it a choice? Is it something else?
Sarah fell in love and got married, but still kept those lessons learned. She and her husband tried to be open about money, both with the serious big picture dreams and the smaller, more mundane transactions.
So it almost took us 9 years to get to this point. When I first met him, I was still a spender. I wasn't a crazy spender, but I would be like, oh, I want this. I had an obsession with shoes when I first met him, and we actually got into a little argument about it one time because my back really hurt. He's like, you just have the worst shoes, and I'm like, but they're pretty. So he took me to a store, and he picked out he showed me what kind of shoes were good quality, and I was complaining about the price of them, of course. And he's like, but literally you spend $50 on this pair of shoe versus your like 5 pairs of sandals for $10, and you're going to save yourself hundreds of dollars in going to the doctor because your back hurts. And, you know, he was right. And I was like, wow, great. You know, and so I learned a lot about money that way from him. And he's a bit more open to like buying kind of gifts. I don't want to say impulsively, but like impromptu trips. He'd be like, oh, you really like this. I'll buy it for you. Like he's a little bit more looser with that stuff. And so, you know, you don't have to necessarily sit down and have conversations. It's just from like everyday kind of interactions too that you kind of learn from each other.
Sarah also noticed by having regular money chats, the two of them weren't so intimidated by them.
2 weeks ago, we did have a big, like, we sat down and looked at our numbers about, like, how much would it cost to move back and this and that. Like, those are definitely necessary. But, you know, make talking about money part of your daily routine, and which is what we naturally do, which I think is why we don't necessarily fight about it all that much, which is great.
Another tip Sarah had was to slowly introduce and kind of feel out your spouse before introducing something big.
For us, if we have to have a big talk, we'll kind of, it's funny how we do it. We sort of start slowly. He'll be like, oh, you know, what's our shipping allowance in our contract? I'll be like, oh, it's, you know, $200 a person. It's like, okay, well, that's $400 we have for a moving budget. I'm like, yes, you know, and then I'll write it down in a spreadsheet. And then next day he'll be like, okay, well, how much would, you know, our son's flight be? Because our flights are paid for by the school. I'm like, oh, it's this much. And then he'd be like, okay. And, you know, we'll start kind of like doing it that way. And then I'll finally like, can we just sit down for an hour and talk about this? And he's like, okay. And then, so that's what we'll do. We'll sit down while our son's napping or whatever. And then we'll like write down all the numbers.
No matter what your styles are, Sarah and myself agree that it's important to just start talking. It might not go smoothly at first, but with more practice, the two of you will feel better about your finances and your marriage. Special thanks again to Sarah. Please check her out at High-Fiving Dollars if you haven't already. You'll find resources to help you have a better relationship with your money, including a free course on how to stop sabotaging your finances. You can check out the links in the show notes. And thank you. Couple Money Podcast is made possible because of listeners like you. Every tweet, Facebook like, and pin you make gets the word out. Thank you so much for your support. Next episode, we're getting into protecting yourself against identity theft. With so many transactions done online, it's even more important to put some safeguards in place. David from Credit Shout will be offering tips to help you out. So if you don't want to miss that, make sure you're subscribed to the podcast. It's free and easy. We're out there on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, and more. You can also grab the feed off our site so you can listen to the show from whatever podcast service app you prefer. And if you enjoy the podcast and find it helpful, could you please leave a review? It takes about a minute, but it is a huge help and would get the word out on Couple Money. Thanks again for listening. Take care.